The dust hadn't settled from the morning's bidding wars when Jake Martinez spotted Unit 47, hidden in the back corner of the Lone Star storage facility in Amarillo, Texas. It looked unremarkable, just another forgotten metal box among hundreds. But something about the way the afternoon sun sliced through the gap beneath its door made him pause. The same way his grandfather had taught him to read the Texas sky before a storm. Jake had been coming to these auctions for 15 years, ever since his construction business started struggling after the 2008 recession. What began as a desperate search for cheap tools had evolved into something more, a treasure hunt that kept his family afloat when regular work dried up. He knew the rhythm of these places, the desperate sellers, the professional dealers, the curious locals looking for a bargain on someone else's forgotten dreams. 47, called out Hank Williams, the auctioneer whose voice had grown hoarse from 12 straight hours of calling bids. Hank had been running storage auctions across the Texas Panhandle for 30 years, and Jake had never seen him look nervous. Today, sweat beaded on the older man's forehead despite the air conditioning humming overhead. Starting at $50. Do I hear 50? Jake studied the other bidders, a skill he'd perfected over years of reading the competition. Most had already packed up their trucks, satisfied with the day's hauls of furniture and old electronics. The morning had been profitable for everyone. Vintage furniture from Unit 12, a classic motorcycle from Unit 23, boxes of collectible records from Unit 31. But as the day wore on, the crowd had thinned to only the most dedicated dealers. Only 3 serious players remained. Jake himself, a weathered local dealer named Rosa Gutierrez, and a nervous-looking man in an expensive suit who'd been taking notes all day but hadn't bid on anything. Rosa caught Jake's eye and gave him a subtle shake of her head. In the unspoken language of auction veterans, she was telling him something was wrong. Rosa had an instinct for trouble that had kept her out of bad deals for decades. If she was backing away from Unit 47, there was a reason. The suited man stepped forward, his Italian leather shoes clicking against the concrete floor. 50. Something cold crawled up Jake's spine. In 15 years of warehouse auctions, he'd learned to read people like his grandfather read weather patterns. The suit wasn't here for profit. He was here for something specific. His manicured hands shook slightly as he held up his bidding paddle, and there was something in his pale blue eyes that reminded Jake of a cornered animal. 60, Jake called, his voice echoing off the corrugated metal walls. 100, the suit countered without hesitation, his voice carrying a slight tremor that suggested this wasn't about money. Rosa shifted nervously beside her truck, her calloused hands gripping her bidding paddle so tightly her knuckles had gone white. She'd been working these auctions since before Jake was born, surviving the oil boom and bust cycles that defined Texas economics. Jake had never seen her back down from a $100 unit, especially one that looked as promising as this. Today she stayed silent, her weathered face creased with something that looked like fear. The suited man's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, and Jake saw his face go from nervous to terrified. Whatever message he'd received, it had changed everything. 200, Jake said. More to see the suit-is reaction than because he wanted the unit. The suit-is jaw tightened. For the first time, he looked directly at Jake, and what Jake saw in those pale blue eyes made his blood freeze. It wasn't anger or frustration. It was the kind of desperate terror that came with knowing your life was about to end badly. $500, the suit said quietly, his voice barely carrying over the hum of the facility's ventilation system. The storage facility fell silent except for the distant hum of highway traffic and the rhythmic ticking of the fluorescent lights overhead. $500 for a unit they couldn't even see inside was unprecedented in Jake's experience. His construction business had been struggling since the recession hit Texas hard, and the recent drought had made things worse. 500 would clean out his savings account, money he'd been saving to pay his daughter's college application fees. But the suit-is terror was palpable now, radiating off him like heat from summer asphalt. Jake had always trusted his instincts. They'd kept him alive during his 2 tours in Iraq and helped him survive 15 years in the construction business. Right now, Those instincts were screaming that Unit 47 contained something worth far more than $500. 600, he said, surprised by the steadiness of his own voice. The suit, his face, went ashen. He opened his mouth, then closed it, looking like a man trying to figure out which way to run when all the exits were blocked. He pulled out his phone with trembling hands, stepped away toward the facility's office, and Jake caught fragments of a whispered conversation that made his blood run cold. Can't let him. Supposed to be empty. 20 years, why now? They'll kill us all if this gets out. When he returned, his expensive suit was wrinkled with sweat stains and his face looked like he'd just received a death sentence. I withdraw my bid. Sold to bidder number 40, 2 for $600, Hank announced, his voice lacking its usual enthusiasm. Jake Martinez, congratulations. You've got 30 minutes to cut the lock and inspect your purchase. As Jake approached Unit 47 with his bolt cutters, the metal tool feeling unusually heavy in his hands, the suited man materialized beside him like a ghost. Up close, Jake could see the man was younger than he'd first appeared. Maybe 45, with prematurely gray hair, and the kind of expensive dental work that spoke of government employment. I'll give you $2,000 cash, right now, he said, reaching into his jacket. You walk away, forget this unit ever existed, and I'll throw in another $1,000 for your time. Why? Jake asked, studying the man's face for tells. Because some things are better left buried. Because there are powerful people who've spent a lot of money keeping certain information from seeing daylight. Because your daughter starts college next year, and it would be a shame if something happened to her scholarship applications. The threat was delivered so casually it took Jake a moment to process it. How do you know about my daughter? We know about everyone who comes to these auctions, Mr. Martinez. It is our job to know. Jake's military training kicked in, and he found himself automatically scanning for exits and threats. Who is we, people you don't want to meet? The lock was old and rusted, the kind of heavy-duty padlock that suggested whatever was inside was worth protecting. It snapped with a sharp crack that echoed through the storage facility like a gunshot, the sound seeming to hang in the air longer than physics should have allowed. Jake grabbed the bottom of the metal door and pulled upward. It rose slowly, protesting with the shriek of unoiled hinges, revealing darkness so complete it seemed to swallow the afternoon light streaming in from the facility's skylights. The smell hit him first. Not decay or mold, but something sterile and chemical like a hospital mixed with a laboratory. There was an undertone of something else. Something that reminded him of the battlefield morgues he'd visited in Iraq, where death was catalogued and filed away in neat rows. As his eyes adjusted to the darkness, he could make out shapes that didn't belong in a typical storage unit, filing cabinets that looked like they belonged in a government office, computer equipment that appeared to be military grade, and dozens of boxes marked with symbols he didn't recognize but that made his skin crawl with familiarity. Jesus Christ, Jake whispered, his voice echoing in the metal chamber. The suited man had gone completely white, his face taking on the waxy pallor of someone in shock. Mr. Martinez, I am Agent David Carson with the Department of Homeland Security. I need you to step away from that unit immediately. Carson reached slowly into his jacket, and Jake tensed, ready to dive for cover. Instead of a weapon, the agent produced a leather badge holder and flipped it open, revealing the distinctive eagle and shield of DHS. Jake's hands trembled as he reached for the nearest box, his fingers brushing against a label that seemed to burn his fingertips. The text read, Operation Blackwater, classified eyes only. Beneath it, in smaller print that required him to squint in the dim light, Project terminated 2003, disposal incomplete. Don't touch anything, Carson commanded, but Jake had already opened the box with the kind of careful precision his grandfather had taught him when handling dangerous tools. Inside were photographs. Hundreds of them arranged in neat stacks that spoke of bureaucratic organization, desert landscapes that looked like Iraq or Afghanistan, buildings reduced to rubble, and faces. So many faces, men, women, children, all with one thing in common: they looked terrified, even in death. Jake's hands shook as he lifted the first stack of photos. The images were professionally shot, with timestamps and location data printed in the corners. They weren't the kind of battlefield photos that journalists took. These were documentation shots, evidence of something that was never supposed to be seen by civilian eyes. At the bottom of the box was a thick folder labeled Civilian Casualties, Unauthorized Operations. Jake opened it with shaking hands, his military experience telling him he was about to see something that would change him forever. The first page was a memo dated the 15th of September 2003, stamped Top Secret in red ink that seemed to glow in the dim light. To Director of Operations from Field Commander Reynolds Re. Blackwater Incident Cleanup as discussed. The unauthorized engagement in Sector 7 has resulted in 43 civilian casualties. Recommend immediate media blackout and evidence disposal. Local authorities have been briefed on the terrorist attack cover story. Families of the deceased have been compensated through shell companies to prevent further investigation. Attached documentation includes photographic evidence, witness statements to be destroyed, and casualty reports. Recommend promotion of Lieutenant Carson for his discretion in handling the cleanup operation. Jake's vision blurred as the implications hit him. He looked up at Agent Carson, who was staring at the memo with the expression of a man watching his past come back to destroy his future. "You were there," Jake said. "I was 26 years old, following orders from men who promised me I was serving my country." Jake turned the page. More memos, more photographs. More evidence of something that made his stomach turn. A systematic cover-up of what appeared to be a military operation gone wrong, with innocent people paying the price in blood while their deaths were erased from official records. "How many?" Jake asked. "How many what? How many people died?" Carson's silence was answer enough. But Jake kept reading. Operation Blackwater had been a classified mission in Iraq, but the files suggested it wasn't the only one. There were references to similar operations in Afghanistan, Syria, Libya, Pakistan, Yemen, all unauthorized, all covered up, all resulting in civilian deaths that were never officially acknowledged, never investigated, never mourned by anyone except the families who were paid to stay quiet. "This unit was supposed to be destroyed," Carson said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The storage company received payment for 20 years in advance. It should have been cleaned out in 2023, but it wasn't. Budget cuts, personnel changes, things slipped through the cracks." Carson's laugh was bitter. "Ironic, isn't it? The most sophisticated intelligence apparatus in human history, and we can't keep track of a storage unit in Texas." Jake held up a photograph of a young girl, maybe 8 years old, lying in rubble that had once been someone's home. Her eyes were open, staring at nothing, and there was a small stuffed animal clutched in her hands. She slipped through the cracks. Carson reached for his weapon, a move so subtle Jake almost missed it. "Mr. Martinez, I am going to ask you one more time to step away from those files." "Or what? You'll add me to the casualty list?" "I am trying to protect you." "From who?" "From them. From the people who authorized these operations. The people who spent 20 years making sure this information never saw daylight. The people who have unlimited resources and no conscience when it comes to protecting national security." Jake looked around the unit, his mind trying to process the scope of what he was seeing. There had to be thousands of documents, hours of video footage, recorded phone conversations, evidence of war crimes that could topple governments and send generals to prison. Evidence that could rewrite the history of America's involvement in the Middle East. "Why didn't you destroy it yourself?" he asked. Carson's hand dropped from his weapon. "Because I was there, Operation Blackwater. I was a young agent then, following orders, believing I was one of the good guys. I saw what happened to those families, and I've been carrying it ever since." The agent sat down heavily on a nearby box, his expensive suit wrinkling as he put his head in his hands. "Do you know what it is like to live with the knowledge that you helped cover up the murder of 43 innocent people? to see their faces every time you close your eyes, to know that their families were paid off to forget their own children ever existed. So why stop me now? Because releasing this information won't bring them back. It'll just get you killed, and probably your family too. These people don't leave loose ends. Jake carefully placed the photograph back in the folder, but not before memorizing every detail of the little girl's face. Maybe, but keeping it secret guarantees they died for nothing. He pulled out his phone and started taking pictures of the documents. Carson didn't stop him. Instead, the agent watched with the resignation of a man who'd been waiting 20 years for this moment. "There is more," Carson said quietly. "Operation Blackwater was just the beginning. These files document 15 years of unauthorized military actions across 6 countries. Drone strikes on weddings, bombing of schools that housed alleged terrorists, assassination programs, targeting American citizens abroad without due process. All of it sanctioned at the highest levels of government." Jake's phone buzzed, a text message from his wife. "How'd the auction go? Find anything interesting?" He stared at the message, then at the thousands of classified documents surrounding him. How do you tell someone you love that you've just uncovered evidence that your own government has been systematically murdering civilians for decades? How do you explain that the country you fought for in Iraq has been committing the same kind of atrocities you thought you were fighting against? "What happens now?" he asked. Carson stood up slowly, his movements careful and deliberate. "Now you make a choice. You can walk away, and I'll handle the cleanup." Officially, this unit was empty. You lost $600 on bad luck. Your life goes back to normal. "And if I don't walk away? Then you become the most wanted man in America, not by law enforcement, by people who make law enforcement disappear. People with unlimited budgets and no oversight. People who've been perfecting the art of making problems go away for decades." Jake looked at the photograph of the little girl again, studying her face in the harsh light of his phone's camera flash. Her name was written on the back in careful handwriting: Amira Hassan, age 7, killed in coalition airstrike, the 3rd of March 2003, listed as terrorist casualty in official reports. "She was 7 years old," he said. "I know. I was the one who wrote the report that listed her as a terrorist." "How many others?" "The files suggest over 2,000 civilians across all operations. Men, women, children, families celebrating weddings, farmers working their fields, children walking to school, all classified as enemy combatants in the official records to justify their deaths." Jake's hands shook as he continued photographing documents, each page revealing new horrors that challenged everything he'd believed about his country's moral authority. Executed prisoners who'd been trying to surrender, bombed hospitals that had been treating civilians, families wiped out in drone strikes based on intelligence that the operators knew was false. "There is something else," Carson said, his voice taking on a tone that made Jake look up from the documents. "The storage unit wasn't abandoned by accident. Someone wanted this information found." "What do you mean?" "The payment on this unit stopped exactly 6 months ago. Not 20 years. 6 months. Someone deliberately let it go to auction." Jake stopped photographing. The implications were staggering. "Who?" "Look at the last document in that folder." Jake flipped to the back, his hands trembling as he found a handwritten note on what appeared to be personal stationery. The handwriting was shaky, the writing of someone whose hands no longer obeyed their commands, but the words were clear and deliberate. "To whoever finds these files, I am Colonel Michael Reynolds, former field commander for Operation Blackwater and subsequent classified operations. I am dying of cancer and can no longer carry the weight of these secrets. For 20 years, I have lived with the knowledge of what we did in the name of national security. For 20 years, I have watched the families of the dead suffer while their governments pretended their loved ones never existed. The families of the dead deserve truth. America deserves truth. I've paid for this storage unit for 20 years. keeping these documents safe from those who would destroy them. Use them wisely. Make their deaths count for something. The key to my personal safe is attached. There are more documents there, including video footage and audio recordings that will provide additional context. I know that releasing this information will destroy my reputation, and the reputation of many good men who were following orders. But sometimes following orders makes you complicit in evil, and remaining silent makes you equally guilty. Do what I was too cowardly to do for 20 years. Tell the truth. Colonel Michael Reynolds, Ret. Former Field Commander, Joint Special Operations, Task Force below. The note was a USB drive and a small brass key. Reynolds died 3 weeks ago, Carson said. Officially, it was cancer. Unofficially. He shrugged. Men like Reynolds don't usually die of natural causes when they're threatening to go public with state secrets. Jake pocketed the USB drive and key, the metal feeling warm against his fingers. What is the key for? I don't know. But Reynolds was thorough. If he left a key, there is something else. Something he considered important enough to hide separately from these files. As Jake loaded boxes of documents into his truck, his movements careful and deliberate, Carson watched silently. The agent's face had taken on the expression of a man watching a train wreck in slow motion, knowing that disaster was inevitable but powerless to stop it. Finally, Carson spoke. You know they'll come for you. How long do I have? Hours, maybe less. Once this hits the internet, every intelligence agency in the country will be mobilizing. They'll use every resource at their disposal: satellites, facial recognition, financial tracking, communication intercepts. You'll be the most hunted man in America. Jake slammed the truck's tailgate, the sound echoing through the storage facility like a gunshot. Then I better move fast. Where will you go? Everywhere, every news outlet, every journalist, every congressman who listen. I am going to make copies and spread them so wide they can't contain the story. Carson handed him a business card with nothing on it, except a phone number. When they start hunting you, and they will, call this number. There are others like me, agents, who've been waiting years for someone brave enough to expose this. We've been preparing for this day, hoping someone would finally force our hand. As Jake drove away from the storage facility, he could see Carson in his rearview mirror, standing alone among the empty units. The agent pulled out his phone and made a call, and Jake could guess the conversation. The files are compromised. Martinez has them. Yes, sir, I understand. No, sir, I don't think he'll be reasonable. By sunset, Jake's truck was parked outside the offices of the Amarillo Globe News. By midnight, he was in Dallas, meeting with reporters from the Dallas Morning News and uploading encrypted files to secure servers around the world. By dawn, he was in Houston, distributing copies to international news organizations and human rights groups. The story broke at 6 a.m. Eastern Time. Classified documents revealed decades of unauthorized military operations. Within hours, it was trending on every social media platform. Blackwater Files became the #1 hashtag in the country, and politicians from both parties were demanding investigations. But Jake Martinez had disappeared. The last confirmed sighting was security camera footage from a truck stop in Louisiana, where he purchased a prepaid phone and a cup of coffee. When authorities arrived at his home in Amarillo, they found it empty. His wife and children were gone too, vanished as completely as if they'd never existed. Agent Carson was found dead in his hotel room the next morning, officially ruled a suicide by a single gunshot to the head. Unofficially, no one who knew him believed he'd taken his own life. The note he left behind contained a single line: "Some secrets are worth dying for." The leaked documents triggered congressional hearings, military investigations, and criminal charges against dozens of current and former officials. But the man who made it all possible, the Texas construction worker who paid $600 for the truth, was never seen again. Some say Jake Martinez is in witness protection, living under a new identity somewhere far from Texas. Others believe he met the same fate as Agent Carson and Colonel Reynolds. But on quiet nights in Amarillo, When the wind carries dust through the abandoned storage facility, locals swear they can still hear the echo of a metal door rolling open and the sound of someone searching for answers in the darkness. The key Reynolds left behind was never found. Neither was Jake Martinez. But somewhere in America, in another storage unit, in another forgotten corner of another state, more secrets wait in the darkness, more evidence of sins that powerful people thought they'd buried forever. Unit 47 sits empty now, cleaned out by government agents who arrived too late to stop the truth from spreading. But the lock has been replaced, and sometimes late at night, security guards report seeing a figure standing outside the unit, holding a key that doesn't fit any door in the facility. Because some secrets, once exposed to light, refuse to return to the darkness, and somewhere in Texas the ghost of Jake Martinez continues his search for justice, one storage unit at a time.